Welcome to the Rural Recharge, a podcast of the Florida Farm Bureau Federation. Rural Recharge is a guided conversation that allows you to cut through the noise and multitude of information out there. You should be able to trust your sources, which is why we're a platform that comes straight from the source, the farmers and ranchers growing what we eat, wear, and use every day. Commissioner, thank you for being here today. It is good to have you, and I sure appreciate it, especially on this first broadcast that we have today of this podcast. And, a lot of us, and especially our audience and our members, have been at least exposed to you and familiar to you. We went through an election. Some of us had a lot of mailers and got to see you on TV, got to hear you on the radio. Tell us about yourself the way we didn't get from the mailers.
Jeb, and thank you for having me on this. It was my life growing up. I was adopted when I was very young, I think 5 years old. And we moved from Plant City to Trilby, Florida. And I always tell folks I'll clear up where Trilby is because most people listening won't know. It's right beside Lacoochee. And in the late 70s, we built an egg farm there that I currently still live on. And we have 1 million chickens. And we started off with about 60,000, and through the years, we've grown it to where we are today. So I grew up working every day of my life, either on that egg farm or my dad had a construction and an environmental business, asbestos removal, that we worked in. So if you were a Simpson, you were working 7 days a week, and we had a chicken farm if you ever had anything slack on your calendar that needed things to be done. So it was a real honor to grow up, and it's a real joy. My children and my grandchildren actually live on that farm today, and it's just neat to watch them grow up and be around agriculture and to be able to get outside and enjoy life being a farmer.
Commissioner, it's interesting too because I was raised in Hastings. Well, that's just a lot of folks. You say that's right next to Spuds, they get it too. So
yes, that's exactly right.
When you do too, in regard to, you've also had a lot of Farm Bureau experience. You grew up in Farm Bureau or have been a part of Farm Bureau. Can you tell us a little bit about that as well?
My very first experience was Farm Bureau in 1978. Alan Altman, our agency manager of Pasco County at the time, walked up our driveway. We were building our first set of chicken barns, and he said, "Hey, do y'all have insurance?" We did not have insurance on it at the time. He said, "Okay, I'm going to get written up for you. We'll come back tomorrow and sign." That same day, we had a tornado come through and tear down one of the shingle roof trusses in one of our barns, and Farm Bureau covered us that day. And we had not even had signatures. The ink had not even been put on the paper yet, but Farm Bureau honored their word, and obviously we've been a Farm Bureau client. But in 2001, I was asked to join the board of Pasco County Farm Bureau, and shortly thereafter, I became president. And then I served on our state board from around 2007 to 2012 when I ran for the Florida Senate. And Farm Bureau is not only the lifeblood of connecting farmers with their insurance needs, but taking care of us in Tallahassee and making sure that our legislature is taken care of and are well-versed in agriculture issues. It's been something I've served 10 years in the Senate, and Farm Bureau is there every year, every week while we're there, and it's been something that's invaluable to farming communities.
Well, thank you. I appreciate those words and appreciate your experience. It's really neat because you got a network of a lot of folks around this state that know you and have been around you, especially through Farm Bureau. So.
Yeah, it's really amazing the difference in agriculture from Homestead to Pensacola. We've got such a diverse group and so many commodities that we produce in the state. And having experience, my commodity is eggs, right? Primarily, we do a little cattle. I've had some citrus in my background and obviously hay fields, but we're really egg farmers through year in and year out. And so, but it's been a real honor to go around and meet a lot of the farmers I had not met. As being in the Senate, being Senate president, and making sure we had the tools to continue to provide food for families here in Florida and around the world. But it's really neat to get out and see, farmers are very proud people, and to be able to see their commodity and the way they manage it is something that's very helpful as we serve in this position as a Ag Commissioner.
I tell you, for me, it's been really interesting, especially as the Florida Farm Bureau president, to get out and be around a lot of our members, to get on their operations, to see how they do things that are different, but they're excited about, and they want to show you, and really exciting things that are going on in this state because it's so diverse, with over 300 commodities being grown. You're Commissioner of Agriculture. You're engaged in this every day, and what do you see? What is the biggest issue that's facing our Florida farmers and ranchers?
There's multiple issues that could be the biggest issue. When you think about our trade agreements at the federal level, is probably what's blocking the most of our prosperity here in Florida. Not having proper insurances for our crops because there's so many specialty crops. We can't get a federal program. We don't have the clout in Washington to make those programs yet really fit the needs that Florida has. And then the competitive edges. You've got so much pressure on growth in the state of Florida, more than 1,000 people a day moving here. So the demand on our property is very high. The regulatory structure, mostly from the federal government, is very high, thresholds to cross. And so there's a lot of weights that we continue to put on the back of farmers in a state that's growing as fast as Florida is, and it makes it exponentially more difficult. And so we're working on all of those issues at the state level. We have been working on those issues in the Senate the last 10 years, and we've come up with some creative opportunities like agritourism, like the Right to Farm bill we did 2 years ago, things of that nature. But we are not to the point yet where we can see that our small farmers are still sustainable in a big way in the state of Florida, and that's where we've got to get to.
You talk about development, and that's a big part of this state. Density, I think we're the 13th densest state in the entire union, but we're the third most populous now. So that does give us a little more clout in D.C. But we've got people moving here, and that has a conflict with our rural Florida, and also with our agriculture. What can you name me some of those things that it does impact negatively in regard to what we're engaged with as a farmer and rancher?
Well, I can give you an example. In East Pasco County, we had a large dairy in East Pasco County in Zephyr Hills, Gore's Dairy, 15 years ago, and had been there for about 80 years. And prior to there being fences, he was there, and he got grown in on top of. And so he had houses on, he was literally the donut hole as part of the donut. And you can imagine the complaints that was coming in from the nuisances of smell or flies or other things that was going on in his dairy operation. And he was one of the most world-class dairy farmers in the state. A well-known dairy farmer, did a very good job. And so when you have people moving in on top of you and then complaining about the things that it takes to produce food, whether it's spraying or whether it's fertilizers or cranking tractors at 5 a.m, or, in this case, a dairy where you have a smell, or an egg farm or any of those type of farms, it becomes such a burden on farmers. It's generally easier to sell and move on, and a lot of farmers have land and not a lot of cash, and they sell that farm. A lot of the next generation is not interested in being farmers in some cases, and they can see all the different things that compete with being a farmer, the environmental issues that are being brought. And I always talk about this in terms of generally the farms that we're using best management practices. We are following the guidelines we need to be successful, but there's a thimble full of nutrient load that's coming from our farm, and in our community there's a 5-gallon bucket. That's right. But it seems like there's some groups that only want to focus on our little thimbleful, and it's making it more and more difficult for farmers to succeed.
It is. But one of the things that you've been a strong proponent for is conservation easements and those kinds of things, especially a Rural Family Lands Protection Act. In full disclosure, my family's been a participant in that, and actually had some opportunity to participate to sell those development rights. And how do you see that as being a good tool in the toolbox for a landowner, especially a farming landowner? Some of these generational farms, 80 years. My family's been in it for 101 here at March 1st. And here we are. We've got opportunities, and we'd like to see them and maintain that history and legacy. But you've been a strong proponent for Rural Family Lands Protection Act. Can you tell us why that is such a good tool for our producers and landowners?
When you think about the Rural Family Land Act, it was put in place in 2001. From the year 2001 to 2021, we spent about $100 million of state money on that program. Last year, as Senate President, I was able to put $300 million in the budget, 3 times as much than the last 20 years.
That's a good thing.
That is a great thing. And what does it do for us? So what we're doing with the Rural Family Lands money is we go in and we buy the development rights from these agricultural farmers, from these farmers that are all over our state. And once we buy those development rights, we then know that land is going to stay in perpetuity in agriculture. So we've got farmlands for the future. It won't matter about growth coming in there on top of them because those development rights have been bought. But when the state of Florida engages in rural family lands and buys development rights, we're getting it for about 30 to 40% of a fee simple purchase. That's right. So imagine $300 million under fee simple would be like $1.2 billion. And think about the idea that now we're doing this, so we're stretching our dollar. We're leaving that land on the tax rolls. So your local governments are getting funded because it's privately owned and with the agriculture exemption on these properties. So it's staying on the tax rolls. And then more recently, in the last few years, we've talked a lot about and we've defined the wildlife corridor in the state of Florida. It spans from Monroe County to Pensacola. And when you think about the wildlife corridor, if you say, what is the wildlife corridor? At nighttime, if you Google a map of Florida and at midnight or 1 a.m., you'll see bright lights everywhere in the big cities, right? You'll see Orlando very clearly, Lakeland, Tampa in my area, all over the state, you'll see these lights. Everywhere it's dark is the wildlife corridor. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about preserving those lands, leaving it in private hands, allowing those farmers to then have generational opportunities, that's all great things. When it coupled with the wildlife corridor, so our wildlife can move throughout the state as they always have, and then it's the major water recharge of the entire state of our aquifer. So when you put all of that together, you're getting 3 times the dollar on the rural family lands. And guess what? We don't have to maintain the property afterwards. If we buy these properties, as have customarily happened in the past, then we have to then maintain the properties. So it's an additional expense on the taxpayer. So I'm hopeful that we can even take a look maybe next year at which properties do we currently own as a state that we might get even surplus, remove the development rights from, surplus these properties, put them back in private hands, private farmers, and make sure that we have farmland in perpetuity that will be relevant in the state of Florida.
I mean, these sound like great ideas. I mean, they're just, every point that you made is a tremendous benefit, not to just a producer, but to the entire state and be honest, and to the nation, because food security is national security. But where's the opposition to it? Where did they come from? Why would somebody oppose something that sounds so good?
I think the biggest opposition are folks that just think that the state should own it all, or the government should own it all, right? At the fee simple purchase, because they believe that maybe farmers don't do a good job, at best management practices or nutrient load or taking care of the land. And it's just a falsehood. And when you think about how few of us today make our living in agriculture, it sometimes is a big story to have to tell. And we haven't not always done a good job of telling our story. And I make it very clear, clearly agriculture is a national security issue. And we all know that oil and petroleum and gasoline are these are all national issues. We have strategic supplies around this country in case we go to war and in case there's a major disruption to our supply. What would happen tomorrow if farmers stopped working for a week and there was no food in the grocery stores just for 1 week? All right, there'd be chaos. If it was for 2 weeks, it'd be total chaos. So when we think about agriculture, we need to be thinking of it through the prism of national security. And all those folks that are complaining about agriculture, every one of them's eating every day. You can tell just by looking at them, right? And you need a farmer at least 3 times a day. And sometimes I think that gets lost when we're piling regulation on the back of our farmers. And we have seen coming through the pandemic, the supply chain, how fragile it is. And we're seeing more of that in our food supply. We're doing a bill this year that says that, foreigners or foreign enemies cannot buy our agriculture land or around our military bases. That's common sense. If any of those countries currently own land, they'll have to surplus that land within a few years. And so it's very important of us when we think about agriculture to realize that we're talking about a national security issue that's more important, I believe, than even our oil supply, because you can overcome $5 or $6 gasoline as Americans. We will be creative and do that. You cannot overcome a couple of weeks of no food in the grocery store.
That we completely concur, and that's why that's why this broadcast is so important to have, is because it's folks like authority like yourself that is a producer that understands where we're coming from, that has sacrificed to be engaged in the political side of things, that can stand for a reason and for our well-being statewide, to our sustenance, to our viability, to our sustainability. Everything you mentioned, it has an environmental benefit, it has an economic benefit. It just seems to be so logical, so reasonable that sometimes it's almost dumbfounding to myself and others that somebody would oppose it.
Well, it's normally extremists on the other side of this, that believe that, that farmers are polluting the land, that we do not care for this land in a way that we obviously do. Land is very sacred to their farmer. They're pulling their living out of that ground every day, and they're growing somebody's food every day. And that's the way we farmers look at it. And that doesn't mean that there's no ever bad apples or there's no incidents that happen that shouldn't happen. But that's why we have best management practices. That's why we have a Department of Ag doing inspections. That's why we have safeguards within the system. That's why Farm Bureau is working very aggressively around the state with their farmers with their CARES program. That's right. And using best management practices. So there are checks and balances within the system. And as I have went around and I've met in front of several of our committees in Tallahassee, every one of them understand these outlays that I'm putting together for the rural family land. And so I think we'll be very successful going forward. And we need to buy, we have so much development rights in this state to buy to get to where we want to go. We're going to go to the willing sellers. That's what we are dealing with is willing sellers, but we're not going to, if we run into a snag with a particular landowner of negotiation, we're just going to go to the next one. And we're going to do this as quickly as possible and get this money spent, because if you really want to waste taxpayer money, hold that money in escrow for 2 or 3 or 4 years. And then it's like with the inflation that we've had the last couple of years, now you've got half your money. Right. That you started with.
Doesn't go nearly as far.
No, and so that's part of the frustration on the fee simple purchases that we've made is a lot of these dollars will appropriate and they won't get spent for 4 or 5 years. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, but now we're dealing with half the money in value that we started with. And I think there were some hang-ups there with, you had to pay 90% of appraised value. You had to negotiate other things. And we're not going to let those be factors, because if you want to pay 90%, just wait a year and you'll be paying 110%. Wait 2 years, you'll be paying 115% and so on. And so, no, I think it's very important. It's vital to Florida's long-term interests. It's vital to the United States' long-term interests. And clearly it's, the world's interests that we're a major ag producer here in this country.
Absolutely. Salabola of this side of the country, that's for sure.
That's right.
And here we are, you mentioned CARES as well. That's the County Alliance for Responsible Environmental Stewardship, and we have some tremendous stories to tell, and somehow farmers aren't able to do that and do it very effectively at times. The water conservation, the reduction in fertilizer use, the effective and efficient part of our producer to even compete in a global market is just very powerful. And you allude to that, but we've got some videos and things that can demonstrate that. Why do farmers fall so short in telling that story that's so important for everybody to know?
I think from a farmer's perspective, and I would be the same way. Being involved in Farm Bureau programs for the last 30 years, I have adapted, and we used to bring a lot of people to our egg farm. Of course, we don't now because of bird flu. But, farmers generally get up every morning, work hard all day long, do their jobs, and want to go home and spend time with their families. And we don't take that extra step because we think, well, everybody knows this. This is common sense, right? That the things we do, it just makes common sense to us that everybody would know this. And what we've done is we've raised several generations where in our school systems, liberal arts are required, but agriculture is no longer required. Mm-hmm. And I think we're probably 2, 3, 4 generations away from the farm in most Americans' cases. And we probably need to look back at in our school system is, should we be teaching agriculture courses, maybe even starting in elementary school right on through high school, just to bring our population up to speed on what real agriculture looks like these days? Because it's not a garden in your backyard. No, that's not going to feed the state of Florida and America.
That won't do it, will it?
No, sir.
Not at all. One of the things, too, we have in this state, we have a Greenbelt tax law that I think is extremely important to our producers. Can you talk about that just for a minute, the importance of Greenbelt to a farmer and rancher?
Yes, sir. So when I got elected in 2012, the Greenbelt law had not been updated in 50 or 60 years, I think, since it had been written. And we had property appraisers around the state interpreting it differently per county. So we as farmers, in some cases, we had it good because we had highly educated property appraisers on our issues, and in some counties we were struggling, and so we changed that Greenbelt law. And what the Greenbelt law essentially does is the real estate itself is taxed based on what you're doing with the property. There's a cattle rate, a row crop, the different types of agriculture activities would be applied to the value of that land, so that you're paying the appropriate amount of ad valorem tax, not if there is a a commercial piece of property moved in beside you and then raised the prices of your property, all that would do is guarantee that we've got to sell our property because we can't afford to pay those real estate taxes, right? So that would end us as farmers. And so Greenbelt allows this state and other states, but particularly in Florida, it allows us to pay the fair market value of our real estate based on the ag commodity that we're producing. And in 2012, we updated that to say that it's a very difficult price for a process for county commissioners, our value adjustment boards to take ad valorem away from our farmers. I have not heard many complaints since we passed that bill. And so we're very proud of that. And it's a tool in the toolbox that without farmers would not exist, similar to the Right to Farm updates that we did a few years ago.
No, and I appreciate that because we do see the value. And I think also I'd read a study not too long ago that a county commission had done. It was Hillsborough County Commission had done, actually stating that the ag value of ag lands was actually for every dollar that they contribute in ad valorem taxes, they only get 29 cents in service, where a resident spends $1 in ad valorem taxes, but gets $1.37 in services. So that's pretty interesting.
We did that study in Pasco. This was about 20 years ago. It was starting to go around. Well, what do these various groups pay? And what we discovered was residential then, for every dollar they paid in, was about $1.50 in service. On commercial and industrial properties, it was about 60 to 70 cents on the dollar. So every dollar that commercial paid in or industrial, they got 60 to 70 in services. Farmers has always been around 20-25%. Right. So the more agriculture you have when you're thinking about building out a county, if you balance enough agriculture in there, then you don't have the demand on the services, right? There's not going to be too many ambulances come to an orange grove or a row crop service, and you don't need a whole lot of law enforcement out there. We tend to take care of that ourselves. But anyways, no, it's very important for our citizens to know these things. And I think we have to do a better job probably in our K-12 system educating our population to make sure they can see the real value of agriculture in their communities.
Interesting enough, that's where some of that ad valorem tax goes, is to educate our young people. And here we are subsidizing it because the residential does not cover it. Even all the more important to have agriculture in the state of Florida, keep it there, sustain it, remain it. And you've just absolutely proved that every day. And
I think that by looking at the lands that we currently hold in state ownership and looking at those lands and saying, okay, what was appropriate to surplus, right? And there's a land that's not. There's land that the state of Florida should own, and there's national parks here, and there's state parks and things of that nature. But I'll bet there are tens of thousands of acres, maybe hundreds of thousands of acres that we currently own that could be served very well in private hands, put that property back on the private tax roll, the property tax roll in that county, and a lot of these are small counties, and let people farm those lands. And we're going to take a look at that.
One of the things that you do as a commissioner now, you're over the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and some of that is actually taking care of some invasives that are on some of those properties too. So there are some of those state-owned lands that have some problems that need to be addressed so that it doesn't take over the state with different flora and fauna that can be a problem. Have you had any engagement in that so far as a commissioner?
We've been on the job about 6 weeks now, and we've had an engagement in a lot of areas. We went and actually saw a fire that was out of control in Bay County last week. That was very interesting, and seeing how our firefighters attacked that and put that fire out very well. They did a very good job. And when you think about our controlled burns here in the state of Florida, and you see bad examples of this, if you go out west, California and Denver and all those areas, they don't do a very good job of control burning of their forest systems. And so in Florida, we do a lot of control burns. I think we do more than anywhere in the country. Clearly, we are fighting invasive species with not only with fire, but with chemicals and things of that nature. And it's very important that your Department of Ag stay ahead of that curve. If we owned less of the land as we currently do, we would have less to do, because then you would have private landowners in there fighting with us. So we're spending tens of millions of dollars annually fighting those issues, whether it's your forestry issues or your invasive species. And I believe over time, clearly those expenses go up and up, because inflation, because it costs more to manage, equipment costs more, chemical costs more. So I think in the long run, if we're going to right-size sort of Florida's government on this issue, we're going to have to look at surplusing some of those lands back into private hands, and then letting those private landowners use their best management practices to take care of a lot of these issues.
And we do.
We do. We already
Absolutely.
do. But we need to do more of that.
That's right. Well, talking about the relationship between Farm Bureau, and Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. What can we do as Farm Bureau members to be a better partner, or likewise to reciprocate from even Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services? How can we develop and better that relationship?
I think that we're doing a lot of these things already, but I think as we look at ag in the classroom, making sure, I know Farm Bureau has a very aggressive program at helping fund those issues, or has had in the past. We're looking at that as the Department of Agriculture, making sure that our teams are out in the field are working with Farm Bureau teams in the field, not going just to the same places, but making sure that we're really educating our population around the state on what it is that we're accomplishing for farmers and why these tools are important. And we discovered, with the pandemic, everyone wanted to move out to the countryside. When they got there, then they want to tell us how to run the farm, right? Well, why are those tractors getting up so early? Or, why are they, and like I said, well, they turn on at 6 because it would be impractical to bring everybody in at 5, right? Or we would. But when you think about, dust on dirt roads, if you live out in the country, you're going to have dust if you live by one of those farms, right? We spray chemicals to kill various things in our crops and in our fields. We spray fertilizers. Sometimes that's organic fertilizer. And so there's a smell to these things. And so anyways, I think that a lot of people move out there and then they were just like, oh my God, they should do this differently. And the fact is that your farmers in the state of Florida are on the cutting edge of technology. AI is infiltrating all of our systems, watering systems, fertilizing systems, and we are on the cutting edge.
When you say AI, what do you mean by AI?
Artificial intelligence. When you can have drones go up and look at your water control issues, invasive species, pesticides, where you may need more or less. So you have a lot of technology in a tractor today. And I used to say that, I said this a lot, but 30 years ago, I was pretty good at running a bulldozer or a tractor, right? Because you could get on there with levers. Today it's computerized, and it's like just pulling my teeth out now to run a tractor because I want to do it manually, not with all these, this computer system. But the computer systems are making us a lot more efficient. We're using a lot less fertilizers. We're using a lot less water. We're updating those best management practices, working with UF and IFAS to do the studies to make them, with more modern techniques involved. And so we're doing everything we can to reduce the nutrient load and the water demand of agriculture. But at the end of the day, we need to always remember that we are producing food for everyone that lives on this planet, and in particular, for us in the state of Florida. And so when you think about farmers and then you think about a regulatory structure, look through the lens of we're a national security issue, and then do your regulation, not the other way around.
Absolutely. We need farmers.
That's right.
There's a bumper sticker at home that says, when you gripe about the farmer, don't do it with your mouth full.
Yeah, that's it. And there's another one that says farmers are the first environmentalists. Both are true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What words of wisdom can you offer to our members who are wanting to make a difference?
Meet your legislators. Meet with the governor's office if you can. Meet with your House members, your senators, not the ones you're just comfortable with. Meet with all of them. Invite them to come see your operations if it's if possible. Like in my egg operation, we used to do a field trip down there every year. We can't do that anymore because of AI, but the avian flu. But the reality is really sit down with your legislators, have them come out to your farm, set up a time and date to do that, because they'll say, oh, yeah, we're happy to do that. Get a time and date scheduled and really educate our legislators, because that's who's ultimately making these laws. All the good things we've done in the last 10 years could be undone next year, right, if we had a willing legislature. And so it's very important that you're visiting your local when they're local. It's very important to visit them in Tallahassee when all of these ideas are getting kicked around. And if you're not visiting and you're not engaged in the process, you're likely to become extinct at some point.
Do you think, and especially, farmers don't like rejection either, but do you believe that legislators are really desirous to come and be on a farm?
Most of them are. I'd say most of them are, yes. So you've got a lot, more than 75% of them. Yeah, there's some groups that just aren't going to do it. They're just opposed to us, right? And you'll figure out very quickly which ones those are. And but yeah, most people want to come out and see it. They're fascinated by our food production. When we could bring them into our egg processing facility and they would see that computer system running, they were amazed by it, right? A human hand never touches an egg anymore. Comes in, goes through a washer, the machine weighs that egg, puts it in the right carton, closes the carton. And so it's not farming like what you would read in a Disney book these days. There's a lot of computer and technology systems within farming, and it's important that your local legislators and do events there, have them bring the whole region together. It's important for them to see that operation, that the people that work there are real people. These are farmers. These are generally multi-generational Floridians. And it's important to see how they care for that property, because the picture they'll see, the 10-second commercial they'll see, the one time there was an animal abuse somewhere, the one time that there was some sort of a nutrient load problem, water irrigation problem, that's going to be on your local news. You can see that anytime it happens. But actually going out there and seeing what farmers do, getting involved in their operation to be able to see this is what we really do, 355 days of the year, one day a year we may have a problem. But we're humans. We're going to make mistakes, but we are going to grow the most safe, affordable, abundant food anywhere in the country, right here in the state of Florida. And that's what they need to understand. And it's not just our one particular issue on our one particular farm. All of those add up to we're using less water, less fertilizers, we're growing more food, and we need to be able to continue that. And if we continue to burden farmers or at any level, we're not going to be able to do that here in the state of Florida. And I'll give you an example, and I say this all the time. So, Germany 30 years ago made a deal with Russia back when Russia was going to be a democracy and it was never going to cut their natural gas off, right? They were going to have a pipeline going into Western Europe and things were good. And that was sort of a little, a wedge between America and Russia, but hey, everything was going to be great. Fast forward to 2022 when they invade Ukraine and cut the natural gas off, and their utility bills went from $150, $200 a month to $4,000 a month.
Sure.
And their governments had to come in and bail all this out. And so, Germany allowed Russia and Western Europe to put them in that position. We never want the the United States of America to be in the position where we're importing our food and a war come along or a pandemic come along and we get cut off and it's our people starving.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But sometimes that's helpful to have actually farmers involved in the legislative process, not just as a farmer going to Tallahassee, but to be run and to be an elected official like yourself. Would you encourage farmers to go and actually run for office?
I've said that many times. That's a good point. It's different from having people who support farmers. I have supported a lot of folks that support farmers. I've supported very few that are actually farmers. And, and if you look in the Florida Senate, I think, Ben Albritton's still there. He's a farming background. He's going to be our Senate president, about 2 years from now. And that's great. But who's after Ben Albritton? That's 1 out of 40.
Right.
When I was there, I had Ben Albritton, and then I had a lot of senators that really love their farmers. They love them, but they don't work on a farm. They didn't work on a farm growing up, and they love us, but they don't understand what it takes, some cases, to actually survive in that world. And when you have strong leadership, that can be overcome. But if we do not have farmers in the House and in the Senate, we will eventually get overrun.
I just want to say thank you, because I know it is a sacrifice for you to do what you do, and as well as Senator Albritton, just thank you for being willing to actually take the time, take a pay cut, and go to Tallahassee and speak on our behalf, and something that you're obviously very passionate about and very knowledgeable of. And say thank you for running for Commissioner of Agriculture and being willing to actually stand in the gap for us. And it's nice to have a commissioner that understands what producers go through every day and have some sympathy. And to me, it's a wonderful thing. And I want to say thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's been an honor of a lifetime to serve in the Florida Senate and to be Senate President through the pandemic and help lead us through the pandemic and all of the different bills that we did through the last 10 years. We always talk about agritourism, the fire marshal bill that we did, the Greenbelt bills, the statewide water policy bills. All of the things that we did in that decade, farmers were in the room, and in some cases were Senate President, and that made a big difference on that farming community that we have here today in Florida. We can't control the Hurricane Ians that'll come across here. We have to deal with those things, but we can do it in a timely fashion, right? We can be prepared for those things. And so I think that, certainly to me, it was an honor of a lifetime to be a senator and Senate President. the idea that now I've been the ag commissioner for 6 weeks is a great honor. Very big state. I'm visiting all over this state, and my goal is before the end of the first year to visit all of our ag facilities within the State Department of the Department of Ag over the next 12 months, at multiple times in some cases, because that's how we learn. How are we going to do our forestry and get the equipment they need and the manpower that they need? And how are we going to deal with our law enforcement division? How are we going to deal with our weights and measures and pest controls and the consumer side, the grocery stores and the convenience stores and the things that we have to do as Department of Ag? And I love to work. I love to get up. I get up every day thinking our job is the most important job that you can do in this state, because if we don't do our jobs, none of the others actually matter. And we normally talk about that in terms of law enforcement. If you don't have law enforcement, what else matters, right? Well, if you can't feed anybody, what else matters? And so we don't normally look at farmers under that light. And I go back to the pandemic. I told a group the other day in Lakeland, when you think about the pandemic and everybody was locked in their house April of 2020 and the pandemic was here and we didn't know how bad this was going to be or how many of us were going to die of this, with COVID, farmers went to work every day.
That's right.
Every day. And truck drivers went to work every day, by the way, too. And had either one of those two have shut down, you wouldn't have had food in the grocery stores during that time. And grocery stores went to work. Their employees went to work every day to make sure that people could go there and pick up their necessary food and survive through that time in our lives. And so I think a lot of times we look at, as rightfully so, our law enforcement's the backbone of our, society here in Florida. We cherish our law enforcement community. I equally cherish our agriculture community, because without our agriculture community, we have nothing to eat. And, like I said, you take a couple of weeks with no food in the grocery store, you break our supply chain here on food, you would have real riots in this state or in this country.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hungry people are violent people.
That's exactly right.
That's right. Well, Florida Farm Bureau's theme for 2023 is growing forward. And in your new role, how are you growing Florida agriculture forward? Can you summarize that in a sentence or two?
I will try, because I get long-winded, as you know. But no, when you think about growing forward, what we need to make sure of is that we have property available to do agricultural lands the next 50, 100 years. We need to make sure we have the resources. We need to make sure we have the water. We need to make sure we have access to the proper nutrient, the fertilizers and things of that nature. We need to make sure we're not burdening our farmers with regulation and disadvantaging our farmers with regulation that doesn't count for other states. And if we do those things, agriculture, I will always bet on the American farmer, and in particular the Florida farmer.
Well, thank you so much. I want to say thank you for being here today. Thank you for what you do. Again, I appreciate you. I appreciate having a commissioner of agriculture that understands Florida agriculture. It's a blessing to have you there. Anything you'd like to say that I didn't ask a question about?
I would be too long-winded.
No, you go ahead.
Look, I think when we look at the next 4 years, if we can accomplish making sure that our foreign enemies can't buy our lands. If we could buy $1 billion worth of development rights, remember, that'd be like $4 billion of fee simple.
That's right.
We will start putting a down payment on our grandchildren's futures that are wanting to be farmers, which is everybody's future, by the way.
That's
and
right.
so I think, if you look out there and we have our rural family lands is in high gear, and it already is, but if it'll stay in high gear, if we can, again, stop our foreign enemies from buying these lands, if we can make sure that we're removing pebbles out of the way of farmers instead of adding them in front of them, I think Florida would not only be a world leader in business and raising a family and a fun place to come to, but we'll also remain an agriculture leader, which is important to our long-term survivability.
Well, thank you so much. And again, for those listening, it's Commissioner Wilton Simpson, your newly elected Commissioner of Agriculture for Florida and lead of the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Been at it for 6 weeks, but been farming a whole lot longer and loves the industry and loves trying to keep us in business. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.